Hello, I'm Corinne Strange and I'm the Head of Policy, Practice and Communication for the National Adoption Service for Wales. Today I'm going to share with you through a series of slides some of the new developments that have happened in adoption practice and service delivery across Wales over the past 10 years. Thank you for watching and I hope that you find the information will be helpful. As well as this presentation, the National Adoption Service also commissioned Africa Cymru to develop a series of e-modules and webinars about modern adoption practice in Wales and its place in care planning for some of our children. This particular module will take approximately 30 to 40 minutes, but of course you can pause whenever you like. There may of course be some things that you're very familiar with. That being the case, I would suggest you skip through to some of the things that may not have reached you just yet. So in this module, I'll be covering how adoption is now being delivered in Wales, a little bit about Welsh early permanence, the lifelong implications for those involved and the importance of having good quality information, how we're now viewing contact, keeping in touch with birth family members, and I'll go into some detail about that later on, and a little bit about adoption support that we know makes a difference. Just a word about terminology here. For the purpose of this module, I will be saying contact, but I am aware that some areas are moving away from this and referring to it as keeping in touch, maintaining relationships or connections, or similar phrases, and all are absolutely fine. So how are we delivering adoption in Wales? Many of you will already be aware that the structure changed in 2015 with the formation of the National Adoption Service for Wales and the development of 5 regional adoption collaboratives across the 22 local authorities. The service comprises of a small central team which facilitates policy and practice development and which includes the Adoption Register for Wales on behalf of the Welsh Government. Then we have the 5 regional collaboratives, 2 voluntary adoption agencies and another adoption support agency. Our regional collaboratives are made up of the following: North Wales, which is Anglesey, Gwynedd, Conwy, Denbighshire, Flintshire and Wrexham; Mid and West Wales, which is Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Powys; Western Bay, which is Swansea, Neath Port Talbot and Bridgend; Vale Valleys and Cardiff, or VVC, which consists of Cardiff, Rhondda Cynon Taf, Merthyr Tydfil and the Vale of Glamorgan; and finally South East Wales, or otherwise known as SUAS, which is Caerphilly, Blaen y Gwent, Torfaen, Newport and Monmouthshire. It is important to note that each local authority remains as an adoption agency in their own right, but delegates certain areas of practice, for example, adopter recruitment and access to records, to their regions who act on their behalf. And then we have our voluntary adoption agencies, which are St David's Adoption Service and Barnardo's Cymru, both of which recruit, train, assess and support adoptive families across the whole of Wales and also place children from all of the regions of Wales with their approved families. Adoption UK, our adoption support agency, offers peer support and advice, training and therapeutic services, and on behalf of NAS, run a child and young person service across Wales. They also facilitate for us the annual Big Adoption Conversation, which is a national opportunity for us to listen and respond to the voices of all those affected by adoption. And then finally, Africa Cymru, who are our strategic partners and promote with us good practice across the breadth of permanence planning in Wales and offer advice, training and consultancy to professionals and members of the public. We also work with others across different sectors, with partners in health and education, and of course with Welsh Government and Cardiff University. So moving on then to look at the lifelong implications for birth families and adoptees. In all of the work that we do as part of the National Adoption Service for Wales, we are crucially aware of the lifelong implications of adoption for everyone involved, and this could not have been more highlighted than when initially speaking at the NAS Big Adoption Conversation event in January 2023. Julie Morgan, the then Deputy Minister for Social Services in Wales, made a personal apology to those affected by the historical practice of forced adoption
that took place in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, and the lasting legacy on all of those who experienced them. And then in April 2023, the Deputy Minister invited some of those affected to meet with her in the Senedd, where she issued an apology on behalf of the Welsh Government for the societal failures that led to those historical practices, which resulted in many women being coerced into giving up their babies as they were judged by the morality of society at that time. These apologies came after the Joint Committee on Human Rights published its recommendations following an inquiry to understand the experiences of unmarried women whose children were adopted between 1949 and 1976 in England and Wales. The Deputy Minister acknowledged that they cannot change what has happened, but welcomed the inquiry's recommendations and provided assurances that adoption legislation and practices have been significantly strengthened since that time. She also provided assurances that the Welsh Government is working with us to consider the issues outlined within the Joint Committee's report and to develop support services which will address the specific needs of those affected by forced adoption and forced family separation. For more information on the lifelong implications of adoption, please refer to our website. So this is one of the slides we've been using in our webinars delivered to other professionals to talk about how adoption has shifted and how practitioners are working to address the key issues that are so important for the child and family in terms of identity formation and continuity of relationships. One of the key changes that we've seen across Wales is an increase in the birth parent adopter meetings, which we know helps future keeping in touch. Delivering adoption support continues to be a challenge, especially with ongoing budget cuts and increased needs, but it is so important. I'm sure it will not be new for many listening to this to hear me say that historically, adoption used to be about finding children for people who could not have their own children. So the focus was very much on the adults only. But over the years, the concept and legislation of adoption, as well as practice, has changed considerably. It is now about finding families for children who need a permanent alternative family for life. And again, you will know that these are often the most vulnerable children in our society, those who have experienced significant pre- and post-birth developmental trauma, which affects all aspects of their development, their inner working model and attachment patterns. So whereas there used to be a complete severance of any forms of contact between a child and their family of origin, and no real understanding of a child's needs for information and an understanding about their identity, a kind of off with the old and on with the new arrangements, which we now know is hugely damaging for them and does nothing to strengthen the adoptive family or help birth families move forward. Adoption in today's Wales is very, very different. It now fully acknowledges the need for clear, coherent information to be shared with every child in an age-appropriate way about their family of origin and the reasons why they weren't able to stay with them. Not only does this help a child understand their past and give them a cohesive sense of their history, but it also takes away the blame from the child and enriches their personal view of themselves. As practitioners, we have to be thinking about family, relationships, loss and identity rather than about contact, and about how we practice in a way that is right for the child now and as they mature, that helps them develop a coherent sense of their identity as an adopted person and then respects their multiple relationships that are important to them. This includes us providing opportunities for the adults to meet each other, to develop empathy for one another and a relationship that is based on a shared commitment about what is right for the child. We know that meeting each other and understanding each other's perspectives sets a positive foundation for future arrangements. Today's practice in Wales promotes keeping in touch with family members if it's in the child's best interests, of course, and that's with birth parents, brothers, sisters and other important family members, and in a variety of ways. We're thinking more now about direct contact arrangements than we have done previously, and alongside indirect and digital options, we are reviewing these arrangements as the child develops and needs change. We will always do our very best to keep brothers and sisters together if this is right for them and this is a key priority when recruiting and assessing prospective adopters. We know how important these sibling relationships are, not only in terms of them probably being the longest biological connection a child is likely to have, but also the enormous value they bring in terms of shared experience, mutual support, and that sense of belonging. We are recruiting people who can provide stability to children who are older and might have had multiple moves, people who are empathic and able to accept their intrinsic connection with their child's family through their relationship with their child. We're also recruiting people who are willing to become early permanence carers whilst the court is making their decision about a child's final care plan, and I'll talk a little bit more about WEP later. Adoptive parents are prepared and assessed not only to ensure they can provide safety and stability, but also to ensure they can provide the kind of parenting that a child who has suffered developmental trauma needs, parenting that helps them to recover. The adoption regions and voluntary adoption agencies recognise that adoption support is now a normative part of the adoption process and the lifelong journey of families and all the complexities adoption brings, and are continuing to develop adoption policy and practice in Wales in order to help everyone in the adoption triangle. The whole premise of the modern adoption developments in Wales is not to exclude any child where adoption is the only real option that will meet their lifelong needs. And these children include older children, children who need to live with their brothers and sisters, and those who need to remain in contact with their birth family members. Those children who might have missed the lifelong benefits of adoption due to their characteristics. So one of the key strengths of the National Adoption Service is our multidisciplinary collaboration, bringing organisations in Wales who have contact with and an interest in adopted children and their families together to work in partnership. And one of the strategic roles of NAS is to support the ongoing development of good practice and to develop national frameworks that support modern adoption practice and which help to ensure consistency across Wales. In 2019, we commissioned Africa Cymru to develop our good practice guides in a number of key areas. These are contact, transitions and early support, working with birth parents and adoption support, and these are part of the ongoing commitment to the development of services and practice. These were co-produced with colleagues across the sector and drew on research and evidence-based practice from Wales, as well as the rest of the UK and internationally. We were really delighted to be able to develop and implement the guides, and the part the guides play in ensuring that we are as responsive as we can be in bringing adoption up to date and building a system that is fit for purpose, a system that acknowledges the huge complexity of adoption, the challenges of helping a child recover from developmental trauma, and a system which respects children's multiple relationships and identities. We launched the guides in 2020, and we do acknowledge that this did, and still does, seem like a lot of information and changes to practice at a time when services were under huge pressure and still continue to be. We also acknowledge that there was a huge amount of good practice already happening in Wales and beyond, and this was captured in the guides. But it has been so wonderful to see how services have started to apply the information and the difference this is now making in people's lives. All of the guides can be found on the NAS website, as well as on our NAS app, and links for these are included in the slides. We've also developed additional resources to accompany the guides, including the Trauma Nurture Timeline and the All Wales template for contact and adoption support. More recently, we've developed a contact planning tool and guidance based on the 5-step model developed by Beth Neal and Polly Baines at the University of East Anglia, which is designed to be used to aid planning and decision-making at the point when permanence options are first considered for a child. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little while. Our Life Journey Work framework sets out the different stages when this work is done and offers guidance for practitioners, foster carers, adoptive parents and birth parents. And then our adoption support framework, which was launched in 2018, ensures that all adoptive families and adopted children and young people can access a range of support services. For many, these will be generic services with an emphasis on early support to preempt and hopefully prevent serious issues later on. For some families, a more targeted approach is needed to address specific needs such as the attachment difficulties, the impact of early trauma, and life journey work. For a few adopted children, young people and their families, there will be a need at certain points to access more specialist support. For example, in tackling issues related to fetal alcohol exposure, sensory integration problems, and child-on-adult violence. As we don't have the Adoption Support Fund in Wales, we've had to think about it a bit differently. Our Welsh Early Permanence Framework launched in 2022 and includes the core principles around early permanence, which is to provide a child with a secure base as early as possible when days and weeks matter, and to minimise the unnecessary moves that inevitably cause further trauma. Obviously, you'll be very familiar with this as you've been doing it for much longer than us. The different legislation in Wales meant that we had to approach this a little differently, and Welsh Early Permanence is therefore based solely on a concurrency model, but we are delighted it's now in place and up and running. We're always thinking about the different pieces of the jigsaw that we need to get right from the start, and last year we delivered a suite of resources for childcare practitioners, pre and post-qualifying, lawyers and CAFCAS on care planning and the role of adoption in this. It addresses the awful "nothing else will do" statement. We want to make sure that people who make the decisions about a child's future across their lifetime are fully aware of what adoption looks like in today's Wales. And then moving on, in terms of our continuous development, there are 2 further initiatives in the pipeline. We're working on enhancing the assessment of prospective adopters, and this is ongoing and will be available for adoption staff early next year. And we'll soon be starting on a new guide for family finding for children, which we hope will develop practice in terms of placing those children with more complex needs. This next slide provides a brief overview for those who haven't yet come across Welsh Early Permanence. The legislation regarding early permanence is different in England and Wales. Wales does not have the provision of fostering for adoption, which allows for the approval of prospective adopters as foster carers who can then be matched with a specific child. So the Welsh Early Permanence Framework, or WEP as we refer to it, is based on full dual approval as both prospective adopter and foster carer. With WEP, if there is a high possibility of adoption as a final care plan, the child is placed with WEP carers as early as possible whilst decisions are being made by the court about the child's future. If the court agrees a plan for adoption, there will be a seamless transition without the child having to move, thereby minimising the disruption for them. A comprehensive framework has been developed with specific information for parents and their legal advisors, for panel members, social workers and IROs, with CAFCAS Cymru and the judiciary. There is nothing in the WEP framework that seeks to preempt the court's decision in any way, and WEP carers act as any other foster carer, undertaking all the tasks, including supporting contact arrangements and a transition back to the family if this is what the court decides. As I said earlier, WEP was launched in Wales in 2022, and whilst it's still early days, we are pleased that it's already making a significant difference for some of our children. So what is early permanence? As you may know, the whole principle of early permanence is to provide a child who has been removed from their parents or relinquished with a secure base as early as possible, when days, weeks and months really do matter. It enables healthy brain development and attachment through safe, predictable relationships with sensitive adults and minimises the distressing moves that can cause further trauma. Early permanence is the umbrella term given to the practice of placing children, usually at the commencement of care proceedings, when an interim care order has been granted or when a child is relinquished, with foster carers who are also approved as prospective adoptive parents. The early permanence carer works with the care plan as any mainstream foster carer would do, undertaking all of the fostering tasks, including facilitating contact. And it is only if the care plan becomes for adoption and there is consent to place for adoption that the foster carer becomes that child's prospective adoptive parent. The fact that the carers may become the child's adoptive parents does not affect either the status of or priorities for the foster placement, neither does it affect the course of the care proceedings and the court's decision on the child's care plan at the end of those proceedings. Parents should be reassured that their child is being well cared for, that contact is being well organised, and that reunification or placement with the wider family will be facilitated in a professional and child-centred way if that is the court's decision. Though parents do not have the right to object to a WEP placement, as it is a properly regulated foster placement, every effort is made to inform both parents, their legal advisors, Cafcass Cymru and the court, if necessary, of the benefits for the child and also the parents of the placement. It's important to note and relevant here that early permanence carers are first and foremost prospective adoptive parents. Their drive is to become adoptive parents, however their willingness to act as foster carers whilst the court is making a decision about a child's future means that the child is placed much sooner and has fewer moves. The adults carry the uncertainty rather than the child, so for the child it is therefore a win-win. Just to say here that WEP is not just for babies, and we will be considering this in Wales for older children as well. WEP should be considered at an early point for some children who cannot currently live with their parents and where the care plan includes a high possibility of adoption. In very few cases, children will be relinquished, but the majority will have been removed and placed with WEP carers whilst the court is deciding their future. These might be children who are at the start of care proceedings, for example a 3-year-old, where there is a high possibility of adoption due to persistent and ongoing issues within the family and no or little prospect of a suitable alternative family member being identified. WEP is also going to consider children in care proceedings where a parent-child residential assessment has either ended negatively or disrupted and there is little prospect of a family placement. The child could be placed with a WEP carer prior to care proceedings concluding. Equally, a child could be referred for a WEP placement at the disruption of a Reg 26 placement or premature ending of a mainstream foster placement before the ending of proceedings. A WEP placement could also be considered for a child post-care proceedings where the child is placed at home with parents or in a kinship foster placement and where the contingency plan presented to the court was one of adoption should this placement end. So WEP will also capture those brothers and sisters who need to be kept together where possible. Children placed through WEP are likely to have suffered abuse, trauma in utero and post-birth in the same way as children placed through traditional adoption, and so we need to be thinking of the provision of support in exactly the same way. What is different and hugely significant and possibly life-changing for these children is that with WEP they will be placed months or even years earlier, and this will limit the moves they have to make. The uncertainty is held by the adults involved and not the child. So staying with WEP, how does the local authority determine whether there is a high possibility that the long-term plan for the child will become adoption? And this is important. Significant information will already be known about the birth parents, possibly through previous siblings having been placed for adoption. There would likely have been previous assessments completed which had negative outcomes or recent negative viability assessments completed. There is no or very little evidence of capacity to change and address the issues that led to concerns about the child's safety and well-being, despite support being provided. And despite exploration, possibly via family group meetings, there has been no realistic options for permanence identified. So with WEP, as with everything else, language is important, and we do need to be differentiating between what we consider to be uncertainty and what constitutes risk. It's not a risk when we are talking about possible return to birth family. This is uncertainty. There needs to be an informed balance with a high possibility of adoption as a care plan. So I'll now say a little bit about the CAR-B or Child Adoption Report. This is an extremely challenging and complex document, and the refreshed PLO does provide additional challenges in ensuring that the CAR-B report has the right information and analysis presented in the right way in order to inform the final evidence to prove the need for a placement order. And because of its multifunctions, this adds to the complexity, that is, the role in linking and matching, in providing information to the child as they grow, to enable them to have a full and cohesive narrative and a right for the adopted adult at 18 to access. A series of webinars have been delivered across Wales which looks at the CAR-B, and this is ongoing work, especially as we know the workforce is continually changing. We've also included here a reference to a recent project and good practice guidance from the Chief Archivists in Local Government Group, which published in February 2024 a guidance document and summary research report. This work set out very clearly the rationale for services to ensure the clear and accurate recording of information, as well as the need for support for people seeing their information as adults, often for the very first time. What it shares very clearly is that we know that many care-experienced or adoptive people reconstruct their personal histories by turning to their records created about them by social workers and care providers. Thousands of requests to view records for this purpose are made each year in England and Wales. The record, a paper self if you like, has significant impacts on a care-experienced person throughout their life. As mentioned earlier, a series of good practice guides have been developed by the National Adoption Service to encompass the core principles supported by up-to-date research and evidence-based practice. A brief overview of the key principles of all 4 guides is outlined on this slide. So as mentioned, one of the biggest shifts in modern adoption planning and thinking is the need to move away from the formulaic contact plans that simply outline a one-size-fits-all approach to letterbox contact happening once or twice a year. The guide has therefore been designed to support the childcare social worker to think about and analyse the growing needs of the child, enabling continued discussion and training in an attempt to see a level of contact that is right for the child and doesn't require an order but acknowledges that it will also need to change over time. Alongside the guide, the National Adoption Service All Wales Contact Tool will assist social workers to bring to court a safe, child-centred post-adoption contact plan that will allow and enable smooth transition from pre-order plans and prevent any complete tailing off of contact. In Wales, this also means that all prospective adopters are assessed and approved with the expectation that they will facilitate and engage with contact, and on the understanding that this is in the best interests of their child and therefore their adoptive family. We also know from research and surveys such as the Adoption Barometer that now more adoptive families are open to direct contact than are actually involved in it. Having the opportunity to meet with birth parents and siblings and being able to develop relationships with foster carers, as well as good preparation and exploration from a trauma-informed perspective, enables the development of empathy alongside a recognition of the importance of maintaining relationships for our children. As mentioned, we've recently developed a contact planning and guidance tool that is designed to be used along the good practice guides, and you'll see those links are on the slide. This is based on the underlying principle that planning contact for children in permanent placement is a dynamic process rather than a one-off event. The original planning tool on which this is based can be downloaded from the Contact After Adoption open access section of the Research in Practice website. It provides detailed information and guidance on the use of that model with case study examples, alongside a wealth of other resources for practitioners and references to the research on which it is based. So as outlined, the NAS tool is based on the same 5-stage model which considers the purpose of contact, the strengths and risks, the development of a provisional plan early on in relation to each person in the child's life with a significant connection, ensuring consideration of the development of a support plan to ensure the contact is not only meaningful but can be sustained, and also includes a review stage where changes can be responded to and made when needed. And finally, I will move back to further consideration of the adoption support plan and the use of the All Wales support plan template. Before a child became looked after, they will likely have had a Part 4 care and support plan, which set out the support provided to the child and family alongside the child protection plan. And then once a child is placed or becomes looked after, this will transform into a Part 6 care and support plan, which will stay in place until the adoption order is made. Elements of the Part 6 plan may inform the embryonic adoption support plan, and the template will be used for the first and all subsequent adoption support plans, ensuring that it remains as a live and active document that isn't just completed at matching stage and then forgotten about, but used and reviewed as the child and family moves forward. This document will capture the specific support needs of the child alongside the needs of the prospective adopters, with them being active participants in putting the plan together and taking ownership of this. This plan is completed using the Child's CAR-B, the Prospective Adopters Report, information obtained from the Understanding the Child meeting or day, and all other matching documents. Reviews of the plan can take place as the child and family move along their adoption journey, acknowledging that during this journey there will be milestones and challenges involving a significant change or sense of loss, as well as acknowledging that times of challenge also often come at periods of other transitions, for example, from nursery to primary, primary to secondary, and from adolescence to adulthood. The Adoption Support Plan will consider those specific needs arising from proposed contact arrangements with birth family, including siblings, birth parents and grandparents, with foster carers and any other significant person. It will include tailored workshops, training, practical support and supervision with direct contact, and support with life journey telling arising out of that contact. As per the NAS Good Practice Guides, this should always include an exploration of the possibility of direct contact, both to identify who is significant to the child and in order to ascertain needs and services required to meet these now and in the future. Thank you for taking the time to view this module. I hope it's been helpful for you. Further information relating to all of these issues raised can be found on the NAS website.